Shalom, and shalom to everybody on the Outreach Ministry. Today I'm going to talk about a pretty simple subject, the Shabbat. The topic I'd like to talk about is simple but very important to the Creator. It's the Sabbath. You know, most people will start from the start to finish when, taking an approach at the Scriptures and trying to study out the Shabbat. But there's so much, there's just so many things about Shabbat that are in the Scripture that are just foundational things. You know, you don't have to start from front to back. So I think I'm going to take a little different approach and base my study today off of Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4. That's not where I'm starting at. I'm going to start in Psalms 95. That'll be the first scripture for today. But I'm basing my study off of what it says in Hebrews 3 and 4 concerning the Shabbat to kind of get a deeper understanding, because the way it's worded, if you just read it for what it says, you can't always grasp exactly what it's saying. So I did kind of a study based off of that to go through and explain what whoever wrote the book of Hebrews was trying to relay in their message. So just go ahead and turn to Psalms 95, which I don't know what the page number is in the old ISR, but I do know in the new ISR it's going to be page... Yeah, it's going to be page 700 in the new ISR. Okay. I'm just going to start in verse 1, and I'm just going to read all of Psalms 95 pretty much. Come, let us sing to Yahweh. Let us rise up a shout to the rock of our deliverance. Let us come before his face with thanksgiving. Let us rise a shout to him in song, for Yahweh is a great El, and a great sovereign above almighty ones, in whose hand are the depths of the earth. The mountains' peaks are his also. His is the sea, for he made it, and his hands form the dry land. Come, let us bow down and bend low. Let us kneel before Yahweh our Maker, for he is our Elohim, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as they did in Meribah, as they did in the day of Massah in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me, having proved me, though they saw my works. For 40 years I was grieved with that generation, and I said, they are a people who go astray in their hearts, and they do not know my ways, as I swore in my wrath, if they would enter into my rest. See, that's got a lot of interesting things there, and it's just awesome that it starts off talking about the esteem of Yahweh and, how he formed the earth. And then it says, it goes on to talk about the relation of Shabbat, to our daily lives. When he created the earth, he formed the earth, and the very next thing he did was set the Shabbat apart. So I wanted to get a little clearer understanding of what it meant that they tried him in the wilderness for 40 years, and they grieved Yahweh. And he said, as I swore in my wrath, if they would enter into my rest. So I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and go to Hebrews. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 3, because this is the basis of my study today. This was basically my start point. The purpose of reading Psalms 95 is so we don't have to jump back to there as we're going through Hebrews. So I can just make references back to what I just read. Okay, it's going to be Hebrews. New ISR is going to be page 1168. And I'm going to start in Verse 5. And Moshe indeed was trustworthy in all his house as a servant for a witness of what would to be spoken later. But Messiah as a son over his own house, whose house we are if we hold fast the boldness and the boasting of the expectation firm to the end. Therefore, as the set-apart Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice and do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion, in the day of the trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways, as I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. Okay. Look out, brothers, lest there be any of you a wicked heart of unbelief in falling away from the living Elohim. But encourage one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened by the deceivableness of sin. For we have become partakers of Messiah, if we hold fast the beginning of our trust firm to the end. While it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Was it not all who came out of Mitzrayim, led by the hand of Moshe, or led by Moshe? And with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they were unable to enter into it because of unbelief. Okay, and I'm going to keep reading on into 4. Okay, therefore, since a promise remains of entering into his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the good news was brought to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, nor having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. See, it says right here the good news. It talks about Yeshua being the good news. And it says that the good news was brought to them. Who is them? The people who fell in the wilderness. But not being mixed with belief, they didn't have the ability to enter into the Sabbath because they didn't have it in their heart. That's what to me, that's what it's relaying here, is that's why they weren't able to enter into the Shabbat, was not the fact that they didn't know how to do it, was the fact that they didn't have the heart to serve Yahweh. Okay, verse 3. For we who have believed do enter into that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. And yet his works have come into being from the foundations of the world. For somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day, and Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works. And this again, if they shall enter into my rest. Going back to Psalms 95. Since then it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter into it because of disobedience. He again defines a certain day today, saying through Dawid so much later, as it has been said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim. For the one having entered into his rest has himself also rested from all his works, as Elohim rested from his own. Let us therefore do our uttermost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience. For the word of Elohim is living and working, and sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting through even to dividing of being and of the joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and the intentions of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all are naked and laid bare before the eyes of him who is our account. Okay, so it's interesting to me because I hear a lot from Christians and just believers in general about the belief, the good news. And I always hear about Yeshua brought the good news like it was this new message that was something, completely different that nobody had ever heard before in their life. But what I see here is in verse 2, for indeed the good news was brought to us as well as to them. The good news is what? The Torah. Yeshua is what? The Torah made flesh. So it's saying here that the people in the wilderness received the same good news that Yeshua brought prior to Yeshua's coming to earth in the flesh to do what he did. So it's just interesting to me. And the reason why they didn't enter into it wasn't because they didn't have Messiah. It was because they lacked belief. Okay, that word belief is pretty deep. It's got a lot of interesting things to it. Okay, the word disbelief or unbelief right here in verse 19 is apistia, aspita. It means faithless. That is negatively disbelief, or positively unfaithful, disobedient, unbelieving. Okay, so they were unable to enter into the rest because they were disobedient. They lacked the trust. Okay. Okay, so, and I wanted to do a little research into what the word belief was, because in verse, it stuck out to me in verse 2, because it says that the good news was brought to them as well as us, which they heard, but it did not profit them, nor having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. So there's something that had to be mixed in here with the good news to take effect in your spirit. And I wanted to know what that word was. Okay, so I looked up the word belief, which is pitis. It comes from the Greek. It's Greek 3982 in the Strong's Concordance. That is persuasion, creed, moral conviction, righteous truth, of truthfulness of Elohim, or a righteous teacher, especially reliance upon the Messiah for salvation, abstracted, okay, by extension, the system of religion, truth itself, assurance, belief, faithfulness. Okay, so that didn't do it for me, though. I mean, those words are understandable. The word moral conviction is the main one that I use when I'm describing the word belief to someone, because that gives, to me, in my mind, gives me more detail. But still, I didn't feel like that was enough. So I started looking through the scriptures to find some definitions of belief. And if we flip over to Hebrews 10, I can give you some pretty clear-cut examples of the implication of this word belief right here, to get a little bit better understanding what Hebrews chapter 4 is trying to tell us when the good news wasn't mixed with belief. Okay, starting in Hebrews 10:38. That's going to be a page 1174 in the new ISR. Verse 38, chapter 10. Okay. But the righteous shall live by belief. But if anyone draws back, my being has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to destruction, but of belief to the preservation of life. And belief is the substance of what is expected, and the proof of what is not seen. For by this the elders obtain witness. By belief we understand that the ages were prepared by the word of Elohim, so that what is seen was not made of what is visible. By belief Abel offered to Elohim a greater slaughtering than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, Elohim witnessing of his gift, and through it, having died, he still speaks. By belief Enoch was translated so as not to see death, and was not found because Elohim had translated him. For before his translation he obtained witness that he pleased Elohim. But without belief it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to Elohim has to believe that he is, and that he is a renewer of those who earnestly seek him. By belief Noah, having been warned of what yet was unseen, having feared, prepared an ark to save his house, through which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to belief. By belief Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out into the place which he was about to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By belief, he sojourned in the land of promise as a stranger, dwelling in tents with Yitzhak and Jacob, the heirs of him of the same promise. For he was looking for the city having foundations, whose builder and maker is Elohim. By belief, also Sarah herself was enabled to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the normal age, because she deemed him trustworthy who had promised. And so from one and from him as good as so from one and him as good as dead, we are born as numerous as the stars of heaven, and as countless as the sands of which are by the seashore. In belief, all these died, not having received the promises, but seeing them from a distance, welcomed and embraced them, and confessed that they were aliens and strangers to the earth. For those who speak this way make it clear that they seek a fatherland. And yet, if they had indeed kept remembering that place from which they had come out, they would have had the chance to return. But now they long for a better place, that is, a heavenly. Therefore Elohim is not ashamed to be called their Elohim, for he has prepared a city for them. By belief, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Yitzhak, and he who had received the promises offered up his only brought forth son, of whom it was said, Yitzhak your seed shall be called. Reckoning that Elohim was able to raise even from the dead, from which he received him back as a type. By belief, Yitzhak believed Jacob and Esau concerning that which was to come. By belief, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Yosef, and did reverence on the top of his staff. By belief, Yosef, when he was dying, made mention of the outgoing of the children of Israel, and gave order concerning his bones. By belief, Moshe, having been born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a comely child, and they were not afraid of the sovereign's command. By belief, Moshe, having become great, refused to be called the son of the daughter of Pharaoh, choosing rather to be afflicted with the people of Elohim, to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a time, deeming the reproach of Mesha greater riches than the treasures in Mitzrayim, for he was looking to the reward. By belief he left Mitzrayim, not fearing the wrath of the sovereign, for he was steadfast as seeing him who is invisible. By belief he performed the Pesh, or the Passover, and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By belief they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, and when the Mitzrites tried it, they were drowned. By belief the walls of Jericho fell, having been surrounded for 7 days. By belief Rahab the whore, who did not perish with those who did not believe, having received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to relate of Gideon and Bakar and Shimshon and Jephthah, also of Dawid and Shemuel the prophets, who through belief overcame reigns, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became mighty in battle, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting release, to obtain a better resurrection. And others had trials of mockings and floggings and more, and of chains and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were tried, they were sawn in two, they were slain with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and in goatskins, being in need, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and in mountains and in caves and in holes of the earth. And having obtained witness through the belief, all these did not receive the promise, Elohim having provided what is better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Okay, so after reading all that and seeing all the things that all these people did in Torah, and seeing all the examples of what true belief really was, it helped me to get a deeper understanding that believing wasn't just to have the idea that the Creator is the Creator, but to believe, to have moral conviction, to have belief in Yahweh, is to trust without a shadow of a doubt, with every bit of your being, that what Yahweh says is right. Like he said about Abraham, not knowing where he was going, he wandered out into the wilderness, to find this great city that Yahweh spoke of. So that just goes to show that believing Yahweh doesn't mean just trusting that he is who he is, but it's trusting that everything he has ever said and everything he said is ever going to happen is going to come to pass. So it's just, being able to have that complete moral conviction. So I guess I'm going to go to a really simple verse that's pretty easy. It's Exodus 20, just to get a basis of the Shabbat. Because if I'm going to read all this New Testament stuff, I might as well give the command to enter into it, right? Exodus 20, that's going to be page 78. We're going to start in verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor, and you shall do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your sons, nor your daughters, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. Okay, and we all know Genesis 2. And on the seventh day Elohim completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which Elohim in creating had made. Okay, and then so we get the command for the Sabbath day. I think we need to get a little depth of what the regulations for Sabbath are. So let's go to Exodus 16. That's going to be page 74, because we're starting in verse 25. Actually, I'm going to start in verse 23. And he said to them, this is what Yahweh has said. Tomorrow is a rest, a Sabbath set apart to Yahweh. That which you bake, bake, and that which you cook, cook, and lay it up for yourselves, all that is left over, to be kept until morning. And they laid it up until morning, as Moshe had commanded, and did it, and it did not stink, and no worms was in it. And Moshe said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to Yahweh. Today you do not find it in the field. Gather in 6 days, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, there is none. And it came to be. Okay, so that gives us a little insight on how to honor the Sabbath. I think it's interesting also, a little footnote here, is that this command was given prior to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. So coming out of the land, before, the first thing he established with them was the Pesach, and before he ever came near Mount Sinai, he gave them the Shabbat. So in my understanding, the Shabbat was an understood thing from the foundation of the world. And that's why he went through the trouble to reiterate it here before they even got to the giving of the Torah, because this is a foundational thing that this is the first thing you should be doing, is honoring the Sabbath. When you come into the walk, the very first thing you should look at doing is coming into the Sabbath, because that's a sign, a covenant sign between Yahweh and his people. Okay, and Sabbath is, it was important in the past. It was important here in the Exodus, but I've been told by people that it's not going to be important in the future. So instead of listening to opinions, I wanted to ask the Scripture the question: is Sabbath important to the future? So I think I found a pretty good answer for that in Isaiah 56. It's going to be page 458. I'm going to read the first 8 verses. Okay. Thus saith Yahweh, guard right ruling, and do righteousness, for near is my deliverance to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the son of man who becomes strong in it, guarding the Sabbath, lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let not the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh has certainly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, look, I am a dry tree. For thus said Yahweh, to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbath, and have chosen what pleases me, and are holding on to my covenant, to them I shall give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. And also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and are holding on to my covenant, them I shall bring into my set apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their ascending offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my slaughter place. For my house is called a house of prayer for all the people. And the master who gathers all the outcasts of Israel declares, I still gather others to him besides those who are gathered to him. So this tells me that, because according to Torah, the eunuch is not supposed to come near Yahweh's set apart place whatsoever. So, and it says right here that he would be given, that I shall give them in my house and within my walls a place. That means a position within his walls and within his house, and a name greater than sons and daughters. That's children of Israel. He's telling this to the eunuch, someone that's not even supposed to enter his hakel, his temple, into his esteem. So this to me is relaying future things. It's talking about people throughout the ages that have grabbed onto his Sabbath and held tight to it, and that's where they received their esteem, was in that and nothing else. And also, just for reference, because I was talking about the eunuch here, Deuteronomy 23:1, no one wounded or crushed whose member is cut off does enter the assembly of Yahweh. That's just a reference so you can see what I'm talking about, the eunuchs. But, so, it's just really interesting to see that Yahweh went through the trouble to even put in the scripture to tell people that these other nations, because I've heard so many times that the Sabbath was for the people of Elohim, what Hebrews 4 said. And who are the people of Elohim? The Jews. So that's what I always heard, and it just kind of bothered me, because I always thought the Sabbath was made for man. Who is man? So that was something that kind of vexed me. But this right here is just, it's blatant. The nations, the foreigner, these are not the children of Israel. These are other people. So, I wanted to read. Okay, so we see here that this is talking about the future. And then we also know that Yeshua said, not one jot or tittle shall in any wise pass until all be fulfilled. So once everything is fulfilled, is that going to change anything? That was another question I had. So I looked further into the scripture to try and find where it would talk about, once the new heavens and new earth are established, what's it going to be like? Is the Sabbath going to be done then? Or is the Torah that Yahweh gave us, is it still going to be continued to be kept? If everything's fulfilled, if a jot and tittle is going to fall after that point, what jot and tittle is going to fall? So is that the Sabbath? Is the Sabbath going to be done away with? That was a major question I had. So I think I found a pretty good place in Scripture that explains that. I want to go to Isaiah 66, and I want to start in verse 20, which will be page 466. And I'm going to read in context, because if I just read the last part, that's all you really need to get is the last two verses. But I want to read in context starting in verse 20 to kind of get an idea of what's going on here. Because if you just... Okay, I'll read it and then I'll explain it. Okay, Isaiah 66, verse 20. And they should... Actually, I'm going to start in verse 19. And I shall set a sign among them, and shall send some of them of those who escape to the nations, Tarshish and Pool and Lud, those who draw the bow and the Tubal and the Yawnin, and the coastlands afar off, who have not heard my report nor seen my esteem. And they shall declare my esteem among the nations. And they shall bring all your brothers as an offering to Yahweh out of the nations, on horses and in chariots and in litters and on mules and on camels, to my set apart mountain, Yerushalayim, declares Yahweh. As the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel into the house of Yahweh, and from them too I shall take for priests, for Levites, declares Yahweh. As the new heaven and the new earth that I make stand before me, declares Yahweh, so your seed and your name shall stand. And it shall be from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares Yahweh. And they shall go and look forth, or they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me. For their worm shall not die, and their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be a repulse to all flesh. So I just find it interesting, the last part right here. It says, as the new heavens and new earth that I make stand before me, not one jot or tittle shall in any wise pass until heaven and earth pass away. Here's Yahweh's new heavens and new earth that he makes right here, very next verse, and it says, and it shall be from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath. Does it say Yisrael? No, it says all flesh. That's the entire earth. That's everything that's on the earth. All people will come and worship before the Master Yahweh in his set apart mountain. I just think that just gives so much more insight to, I'm the same today as I was yesterday and forever. I change not. I shall not edit a word that has gone forth from my lips. It shows that Yahweh is not the author of confusion. So he didn't authorize this change. The change has never been. The only change is our hearts. And I really don't think the change that was supposed to take place was our hearts. That was Yeshua's purpose. And I think that some people are still struggling with that a little bit. So, but it's always a good thing to be able to go through the scripture and look and see what Yahweh says as compared to what everybody else says. So in closing, I want to read Numbers 6:24. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you. Yahweh show favor to you. Yahweh lift up his face upon you and give you his complete peace.